31 March 1941. You do not question the foundations of an alliance in the middle of a desert war. For months in North Africa, everyone believed one rule so deeply it seemed carved into the dunes themselves. The Italian army cannot be relied upon under fire. British analysts repeated it. German officers whispered it. Even the Italian soldiers felt the weight of it. It had become a judgment, a stereotype, a prophecy waiting to fulfill itself. And the reason was simple. When the shells started to fall, when British armor emerged over the horizon, when dust rose in great brown curtains, too many Italian units had broken before contact. Not all, not always, but enough that the reputation became the rule. And among those who believed it most was the desert's most famous commander, Erwin Rommel, the man the British would call the Desert Fox. But in 1941, one moment, one shattering collapse of an Italian unit under British artillery forced Rommel to speak words that seared themselves into the memory of one young German officer who stood close enough to hear them. That officer was Hans von Luck. And what Rommel said that day would echo far beyond the smoke, beyond the shattered line, beyond the war itself. Because the rule was about to break. Hans von Luck was young, 25 years old, athletic, sharp-eyed, shaped for war long before he ever crossed the Mediterranean. He came from Berlin's officer tradition, fencing, discipline, duty. But what made him different was not pedigree, it was curiosity. He wanted to see how armies behaved under pressure, how men reacted when the horizon turned black with armor, how commanders responded when the map no longer matched the desert. In March 1941, Luck joined the 5th Light Division, later reorganized as the 21st Panzer Division under Erwin Rommel. He witnessed the desert up close, temperatures hitting 130 degrees Fahrenheit, sand grinding into teeth and rifles, days without water, nights filled with the metallic chirp of desert insects around the cooling engines of the panzers. The Axis campaign in North Africa balanced on a knife edge. Britain held Cyrenaica, the port of Benghazi, and the crucial supply corridor stretching toward Egypt. Rommel wanted to rip all of that away, but he faced a strategic dilemma. German strength in Africa. About 14,000 troops, roughly 150 operational tanks, a thin logistical lifeline across 600 miles of sea.
Italian strength in Africa. Over 100,000 men, hundreds of tanks, many outdated, mixed morale after repeated defeats. If the Germans were the spear, the Italians were the shield, and the shield was already cracked. Rommel needed the Italian infantry to hold the line while his panzers maneuvered. He needed them to absorb the blows of British artillery, to stand firm just long enough for his armored thrusts to punch the enemy open. That was the theory. But the desert had a way of exposing the truth of every plan. And one morning, outside Mersa Brega, Hans von Luck found himself riding alongside Rommel's command vehicle as the first British shells began to fall right onto the Italian position Rommel desperately needed to hold. What he saw next would define the moment forever. The first British shell lands at 0712. It's not close, not yet, but you feel the crack in the air. A deep concussion rolling across the sand like a hammer striking a great metal plate beneath your boots. The Italian forward companies, elements of the Ariete Division, shift uneasily. At this distance, artillery is a warning, not yet a threat. But then comes the second round, 0713. A geyser of sand erupts barely 300 meters in front of the Italian trenches. Men duck. Helmets flash. A few rise to look around, a fatal curiosity in the open desert. Luck watches through field glasses. Rommel stands beside him, arms folded, jaw tight. A third round lands even closer. And then the storm begins. 24 British guns open fire in a coordinated barrage, 25-pounders, 4.5-inch mediums, the full artillery weight of a British brigade. Shells fall in chains, 8 impacts in less than 3 seconds, walking forward, tightening the noose. The desert vibrates. Luck feels the shock waves thump into his chest, even from 1,200 meters behind the line. Rommel lifts his glasses. No words. Not yet. Ahead, the Italian infantry breaks.
It begins with one platoon, about 35 men, rising from their trench line and sprinting backward, leaving rifles in the sand. Another 40 join them. Then 100. Within 3 minutes, nearly an entire battalion is streaming rearward, stumbling through the smoke, hands over their helmets as shells chase them. Rommel snaps the glasses down from his eyes. Luck sees it, the expression everyone would later describe in memoirs and interviews, a mix of disbelief, fury, and a grim, cold acceptance. The British barrage intensifies. Rounds detonate behind the Italian lines now, showering the retreating men with shrapnel and sand. A few fall. Most simply keep running. Then Rommel speaks. 4 words. In clipped, furious German. So etwas geht nicht. This cannot be. Luck hears it over the noise, the words cutting through the explosions like a blade. Rommel steps forward, pointing toward the collapsing Italian line, and adds another phrase, louder, angrier. They halten nichts aus. They withstand nothing. British armor begins to appear. 3, then 6, then a dozen cruiser tanks, closing the distance in a loose predatory formation at 900 yards, then 800, engines howling across the hardpan. Rommel doesn't hesitate. He climbs onto the side of his Command SD Kef Z-250, pounding the roof, shouting for the driver to push forward. Luck moves with him. There's no time to think. German 88s, 4 guns, a Flak Regiment 18, race into position, crews leaping from half-tracks, ramming in shells before the stabilizing pads even bite into the sand. Rommel arrives in the middle of them, waving like a conductor demanding the first note. British tanks close the distance, 700 yards, 600, 500. The 88s fire. It is a sound Luck never forgets. Sharp, metallic, a violent rip through the air that seems to pull the sky itself backwards. The first round hits a British cruiser at 480 yards, punching straight through the turret ring. Smoke erupts. The turret lurches sideways. The tank begins burning before its crew can bail out. The second 88 fires. Another hit. The Italians who fled are still running. Rommel watches them. Luck watches Rommel. The German line holds. The Italian line is gone. Rommel shouts to Luck, not in anger now, but in decision. 4. Wir schließen die Lücke. Forward, we'll close the gap. The panzers move, engines revving as they surge toward the point where the Italian position has collapsed. Dust plumes rise behind them, thick as smoke. Luck rides with the lead troop, 10 Panzer IIIs, pushing to seal the gap before the British armor can exploit it. Enemy tanks are now 350 yards out and accelerating. The 88s keep firing. 4 more rounds, 3 hits. But then one British tank makes it through, charging full speed at the German flank. Luck calls out to his gunner, "Links, Entfernung 300. Left, range 300. The gunner fires. A direct hit. The tank stops dead. But on the right flank, Rommel is still watching the Italians flee across open desert. British infantry begins advancing behind their armor now. 2 full companies, maybe 250 men, spread wide to encircle the German position. Rommel knows he's losing time. He orders a counterattack. The German panzers surge forward, firing on the move, 37 millimeter, 50 millimeter, every barrel hot and cycling. Dust clouds swallow everything. Luck sees the British line begin to waver. 2 more tanks were disabled, infantry dropping, scattering, seeking cover behind the burning hulks. And then, in the chaos, something unexpected happens.
A group of Italian gunners, perhaps 12 men, stop running. They turn. They drop to one knee beside an abandoned 47 millimeter anti-tank gun. One of them loads a shell. Another sets the sights. They fire. A British tank jerks to a halt, black smoke rising from its engine deck. Luck sees it. Rommel sees it. The moment seems to shock the desert itself. The Italians fire again. A second hit. Then they cheer, waving helmets overhead, emboldened by their own courage, however briefly regained. But the damage of the earlier collapse is done, and everyone knows it. Rommel dismounts from his command vehicle, walking toward the shaken Italian survivors as artillery thunders behind him. And now Hans von Luck hears the words that will stay with him for life. Rommel's true verdict on what he has just witnessed. He says it quietly, coldly, with the exhaustion of a commander who knows his campaign depends on forces he cannot fully trust. Only die Italiener hätten wir den Krieg hier gewonnen. Without the Italians, we would have won the war here. Luck never forgets the look in his commander's eyes when he says it. Anger, sorrow, strategic clarity, all fused into one hard truth. If you find this kind of forgotten history and battlefield detail as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage, sacrifice, and battlefield reality deserve to be told, and by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. The British attack falters. By 09:30, they withdraw, leaving 9 tanks burning, dozens of infantry casualties, and a cratered landscape scattered with twisted metal. But Rommel's mind isn't on the victory. It's about what almost happened, and what it reveals. What they didn't know was that this moment, the collapse of that Italian line at Mersa Brega, would shape Rommel's entire North African campaign. Because from this day onward, Rommel forms a new rule, not written, not spoken publicly, but etched into his operational thinking. German armor strikes. Italian infantry holds, if they can, but German units must always be ready to replace them.
This single battlefield collapse changes the structure of his deployments. He begins placing German anti-tank screens directly behind Italian forward positions. He pairs Italian artillery with German forward observers. He redesigns the order of advance so no Italian unit sits alone on a threatened flank. British command notices. Ultra intercepts begin referencing axis instability on the Italian front. Reports estimate Italian units breaking at twice the rate of German ones. The impact cascades. At Tobruk, Rommel's insistence on German-led assaults stems from this collapse. At Operation Crusader, he positions German reserves close enough to reinforce Italian units within 30 minutes. During the retreat to El Agheila, German units absorbed the brunt of the rearguard fighting. At El Alamein, Rommel spends months begging Berlin for more German infantry precisely because he no longer trusts Italian stability under fire. And in Italy's high command, the reaction is equally intense. Generals in Rome receive reports of the Mersa Brega collapse within 48 hours. Internal memos urge stronger discipline, greater German cooperation, and expanded fortifications. But morale is a fragile thing. A reputation once broken does not mend easily. Yet the truth is more complex than any stereotype. Because even at Mersa Brega, Luck saw Italian gunners turn and fight. He saw bursts of bravery amid the chaos, moments of steel under a sky of fire. But reputations are shaped not by brief moments. They are shaped by collapses. And Rommel never forgets the collapse he witnessed that morning. Hans von Luck survives the desert. He goes on to fight in Normandy, in Poland, and in the final defense of Berlin. He lives long after the war, writing memoirs, giving interviews, and recounting the men he served with and the commanders he followed. When he speaks of North Africa, he speaks of the sun, the dust, the panzers, the camaraderie, and of that one morning when he stood beside Rommel and heard a verdict sharper than any blade. A verdict about allies, about responsibility, about the cost of war when an army cannot hold. Many of the Italians who fled that day were young men, 19, 20, 22 years old, peasants from Sardinia, clerks from Naples, fishermen from Bari. Their names were recorded only in company rosters, many of which were lost. Their stories, like so many, disappeared into the sand.
Hans von Luck died in 1997 at the age of 86, one of the last eyewitnesses to Rommel's candid fury that morning. To this day, his recollections remain among the clearest windows into how the Desert Fox truly viewed his allies, not with contempt, but with the cold frustration of a commander fighting a war with tools he did not choose. This story matters because it reminds us of the human reality behind strategy, that alliances are made not of armies but of people, and people break, but they also fight, and sometimes they turn back toward the enemy, lift a gun, and fire into the oncoming steel. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm that this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten accounts from the archives. If you want to join us on that mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Hans von Luck and the countless men of the 21st Panzer Division do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.